What would make men volunteer for the army when a war had just begun? The article that I'm going to read through with you was written from a British perspective at the beginning of World War I. However, the British experience was very similar to the way the Canadians felt, and therefore I think that this does a pretty good job of letting you know what it would have been like in Canada. So why did men volunteer? It's important when you are reading to make sure that you're looking at the images and reading what's underneath it, because these very often help you to understand what's in the article itself. So source A says, cheering crowds outside Buckingham Palace as the king announces that Britain is at war. What does that mean to us? Well, it means that obviously people were very happy that they were at war, which seems counterintuitive. But when this war started, it had taken 40 years of political and international upset, conflicts and near war, and people were just done. They were done. They were ready for war. So let's start reading. By September of 1914, the start of World War I, 736,000 Britons volunteered for the British Army, and by 1918, the end of the war, 4 million had joined. I want you to notice this word here, Britons. It's spelled differently than if we just say the word Britain. Britain, B-R-I-T-A-I-N, refers to the country or the series of countries. In this case, when it's O-N-S at the end, it refers to the people who live there, okay, the British people. In comparison, at the beginning of the war, Canada was asked to contribute 15,000 soldiers, but 32,000 volunteered. That means twice as many, more than twice as many volunteered as had originally been asked for. By the end of the war, Canada had sent 619,000 men to fight. Based on the populations of the countries at the time, this meant that between 7% and 9% of the total population had gone to fight the war. But that doesn't really tell the full story. If we take Canada as an example, we would start with a population of 8 million. But then we would have to take 50% of the population away because women did not fight in wars back then. That leaves a population of only 4 million. Of that, about half of the men would be too old or too young to fight. So that brings us down to 2 million people. Now you have to account for the men who are sick or who are excused from war duty, like farmers, policemen, men in university, or men working in factories that provided war materials. Let's call that another 500,000 men. That leaves a population of 1.5 million, and of that, 600,000 went to war. That means that Canada sent about 40% of its young men off to war. That's a huge percentage of men to send, and Canada was not alone in doing this. Australia, India, Hong Kong, New Zealand, England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland all contributed men in about the same ratio. Reasons for the men to volunteer varied. That means that they were different reasons. Most went to fight out of a sense of patriotism, honor, and duty. They believed that it was their duty to fight for their country and their empire, and that doing so was a matter of honor. Britain and its empire seemed to be threatened by the beastly Huns, as the Germans were often described in the propaganda of the time. Okay, so now we have another image with a piece up here. Source C says another reason to join, and this says, the historian Dennis Winter describes the reasons some men volunteered for the army in Death's Men, which was written in 1979. Burt Warrant joined the 10th Londons after robbing the Hackney Empire, which was a cinema, of £300. Private Jenkins took similar evasive action from police in hot pursuit after he had looted German shops in Billingsgate. Men arrested after the lootings of 17 October 1914 in Deptford High Street, which were aimed at German shops, were given the choice of 18 months hard labor or immediate join-up. Okay, so now back to the article. Not all men enlisted because of honor or duty. To the unemployed men, even the average British Army pay of 9 or 10 shillings a week was better than nothing and encouraged some to join up, although it didn't compare very well to the Australian troops who were paid 6 shillings a day. So the Australians were being paid about 3 times as much as the British men were. Canadians were paid $1 a day and got an extra 10 cents a day for overseas duty. That meant that the Canadians were being paid about twice what the British soldiers got, but less than the Australians. The glamour of a uniform and the chance for adventure attracted a large number of young men, especially since everybody expected the war to be over by Christmas of 1914. In the meantime, men who volunteered together were promised that they could fight together in what became known as PALS battalions. Men from the same towns or cities formed their own regiments. When whole schools of boys joined, or all the men from one factory or mine joined, they could form their own regiments. These regiments had very high morale because the men all knew each other or came from the same area. As the war went on, however, these regiments were no longer allowed, because if one man was killed, then all the men in the regiment would have lost an old friend and the morale would go down. Also, if all the men in the regiment were killed or injured at the same time, then the whole town, school, or factory would have lost all its boys at the same time. This would make it very hard for the town to recover. Peer group pressure was also very hard to resist. If all your friends or workmates were joining up, it was hard to say no. It was easier to just go along with the crowd and join up. It took great courage to resist peer pressure, because if you were a young man and you were not in uniform, people treated you badly. It would be hard to get served in a restaurant or pub, and pretty girls might come up to you in public and hand you a white feather. This meant she thought you were a coward, and now everyone saw you get called a coward in public. For one reason or another, many thousands of young men joined up to fight a war they all thought would be over by Christmas. And the last additional information here is source D, that says one veteran, Robert Burns, remembering why he volunteered for the British Army in 1914, in an interview in the 1990s from veterans Richard Van Emden and Stephen Humphreys, 1998. And here's his quote. "I think it was excitement more than anything that made me join up. I was too young to understand what patriotism really was. I lived in the country, and there were not many boys my age, so I thought it would be nice to be with a lot of lads in something of a picnic, because we all thought the war would be over by Christmas." And that is the end of the article. And now please download the question sheet and complete the question sheet and send that in to me. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye. I cannot believe this.